October 2008. A black Pontiac G8 GXP sits under fluorescent lights on a dealer lot in suburban Detroit. It has 415 horsepower, LS3 V8 under the hood, a 6-speed manual transmission and rear-wheel drive. By any reasonable standard, this is one of the best American performance sedans ever built. It also has a Pontiac badge on the grille, and in about 11 months that badge is going to become extinct. The G8 was supposed to be proof that Pontiac still knew how to build something worth driving. Instead, it became the brand's eulogy, a genuinely excellent car that arrived just in time to watch its entire division get executed during the biggest automotive bankruptcy in American history. But here's the strange part: Pontiac didn't die because people stopped loving fast, slightly irresponsible cars. It died because somewhere along the way, the company that built GTO cars, Trans Ams and screaming chicken hoods forgot what made any of that matter. And then it tried to coast on decals. This is the story of how General Motors turned the slogan, "We build excitement," into a sticker pack, and then pulled the plug. If you're into real car lore and automotive what-ifs, hit subscribe. We've got plenty more stories like this one. To understand what went wrong, you have to understand what Pontiac used to be. And what Pontiac used to be was trouble. In the early 1960s, GM had a problem. Their corporate policy said no division could put an engine larger than 330 cubic inches in an intermediate car. This was supposed to keep things sensible, to keep the divisions in their lanes. Chevrolet sells affordable cars. Buick sells comfortable cars. Cadillac sells luxury. And Pontiac was supposed to sell something in between. But a couple of engineers at Pontiac had a different idea. John DeLorean, Jim Wangers, and a small team figured out that the corporate rule applied to engines, not option packages. So they took a full-size 389 cubic inch V8 and made it a dealer-installed option on the mid-size Tempest. Technically, it wasn't a factory engine in an intermediate car. It was paperwork magic. The 1964 GTO was born, and the muscle car era started with a loophole. That car sold over 32,000 units in its first year, almost 4 times what Pontiac had predicted. By 1966, they were selling nearly 100,000 GTOs annually. And suddenly, Pontiac wasn't just another GM division, it was the division you bought when you wanted to scare your insurance agent. Over the next decade, Pontiac built an identity that was genuinely different from Chevrolet. Yes, they shared platforms and sometimes even engines, but Pontiac tuned things differently, and they styled cars with more aggression. The Firebird and Trans Am became icons, especially after Burt Reynolds spent an entire movie outrunning Sheriff Buford T. Justice in a black and gold 1977 Trans Am. Smokey and the Bandit wasn't a car commercial. It might as well have been. That movie moved metal like nothing else in the late 70s. Kids who saw it grew up wanting that exact car, the screaming chicken on the hood, the T-tops open on a summer night, and the sound of a 400 cubic inch V8 echoing off the highway. Pontiac understood something important back then. A car brand is not just a collection of specifications, it's a feeling. Pontiac's feeling was fun, a little dangerous and not entirely responsible, but feelings are hard to manufacture in a committee meeting, and by the 1980s the committees were taking over. The muscle car era ended in the early 70s when emissions regulations, insurance premiums and the oil crisis conspired to kill horsepower. Every manufacturer had to adapt. Pontiac did adapt for a while. The Trans Am kept going through the 1980s with turbocharged 4 cylinders, and eventually a fuel-injected 5-litre V8. It was not 1970 anymore, but the car still had personality. The problem wasn't that Pontiac shared platforms with Chevrolet. Platform sharing had always been part of GM's business model, and it made financial sense. The problem was what Pontiac did with those shared platforms. In the 1990s, Pontiac became the division of plastic cladding. The Grand Am, which sold in enormous numbers throughout the decade, looked like someone had taken a decent car and then covered it in body-coloured bumper extensions from an aftermarket catalogue. The Grand Prix got the same treatment. These cars had aggressive styling, but the aggression was skin deep. Underneath, you often found the same engines, transmissions and suspensions as the Chevrolet equivalents. Sometimes it was with slightly different tuning, sometimes not. Pontiac's tagline during this era was, "We build excitement," but excitement is hard to deliver when your most exciting feature is extra plastic around the wheel wells. Now, some of these cars sold well. The Trans Am was one of the best-selling cars in America for several years in the late 1990s. But sales volume and brand identity are not the same thing. Pontiac was moving units, but it was losing the people who actually cared about what Pontiac was supposed to mean. The loyal customers, the ones who remembered T-tops and hood scoops and that feeling of being slightly irresponsible, were starting to look elsewhere. Then came the Aztek. The Pontiac Aztek deserves a more complicated legacy than it usually gets. In 2001, when it launched, the automotive press treated it like a punchline. And honestly, looking at it now, you can understand why. The design was polarizing in the way that only a car designed by too many people in too many meetings can be. But here's the thing, the Aztek was trying to solve a real problem. Pontiac knew that SUVs and crossovers were the future. They knew that younger buyers wanted versatility and adventure capability. The Aztek had a tent that attached to the rear hatch. It had a removable console that turned into a cooler. It was genuinely innovative in ways that would become standard a decade later. The execution just missed. And in missing, the Aztek did something worse than failing. It made Pontiac look ridiculous. This was supposed to be the performance division, the excitement division, and now its flagship new product was being mocked on late-night television. The Aztek wasn't the cause of Pontiac's identity crisis. It was a symptom of a company that knew it needed to change but had no idea who it was anymore. After the Aztek, things accelerated in the wrong direction. Throughout the 2000s, Pontiac's lineup became increasingly difficult to distinguish from Chevrolets. The G5 was a Chevrolet Cobalt with different badges. The G3 was a Daewoo-derived Chevrolet Aveo with different badges. The Torrent was a Chevrolet Equinox with, you guessed it, different badges and a slightly revised front end. These were not Pontiacs in any meaningful sense. They were Chevrolets wearing Halloween costumes. The G6, which replaced the Trans Am, was better. It had some genuinely Pontiac-like styling and sold reasonably well. But even the G6 shared its platform with the Chevrolet Malibu and did not offer anything particularly special under the hood. It was a decent mid-sized sedan in a world that already had plenty of decent mid-sized sedans. By 2008, a lot of Pontiacs were basically Chevys that came with extra decals and a slightly angrier grille. And everyone knew it. The one exception was the G8, which arrived from Australia like a message from an alternate universe where Pontiac still meant something. The G8 was based on the Holden Commodore, a rear-wheel drive sedan that Australians had been enjoying for decades, while Americans got stuck with front-wheel drive appliances. It had a proper V8 engine, proper handling, and proper sports sedan credentials. Car magazines loved it. Enthusiasts loved it. It was exactly the kind of car that Pontiac should have been building all along. But by the time the G8 reached American showrooms in 2008, it was already too late. The financial crisis that year did not just hurt General Motors, it nearly killed the company entirely. By late 2008, General Motors was burning through cash at a rate that made bankruptcy inevitable. They needed a government bailout to survive, and that bailout came with conditions. One of those conditions was that General Motors had to become a smaller, more focused company. They could not keep supporting 8 different brands that all competed with each other for the same customers. Something had to go. Actually, several things had to go. Hummer was sold off. Saturn was discontinued. Saab was cut loose. And Pontiac, the division that had invented the muscle car and built the Trans Am, was marked for termination. On April the 27th, 2009, General Motors announced that Pontiac would be phased out by the end of 2010. For dealers who had spent decades selling Pontiacs, this was devastating. For factory workers who had built these cars, this was the end of an era. And for enthusiasts who had grown up with Firebirds and GTOs, this was the death of something personal. The last Pontiac ever built was a white G6 that rolled off the assembly line in November 2009. Somewhere in America, there is probably still a 2010 Solstice or a G8 sitting in a garage, one of the final cars to wear that badge before it disappeared forever. Those last year models became instant orphans, brand new cars with no brand behind them. Parts would still be available through General Motors, but the identity, the community, the meaning of being a Pontiac owner, that was already gone. Here is where things get speculative. I want to be clear that what follows is a what if, not history. Some automotive analysts have argued that Pontiac could have survived as a much smaller, more focused brand. Imagine a Pontiac that only built 3 or 4 models, a 2-seat sports car like the Solstice, but a proper rear-wheel drive muscle car, maybe a revived GTO or Firebird, and a performance sedan like the G8. That is it, no rebadged economy cars, no crossovers designed by committee. Just a small lineup of genuinely special vehicles that justified the premium over their Chevrolet cousins. Could it have worked? Maybe. General Motors has shown with brands like Cadillac that focused investment in a smaller lineup can rebuild brand prestige. The problem is that rebuilding takes time, money, and corporate will. In 2009, General Motors had none of those things to spare, so Pontiac died, and with it, something intangible but real was lost. The strange thing is, the market for fun, slightly irresponsible cars did not die with Pontiac. Dodge kept building Challengers, Ford brought back the Mustang with a vengeance. Chevrolet revived the Camaro. The muscle car, far from being extinct, has arguably never been better. But Pontiac is not part of that story anymore. There is a generation of car enthusiasts who remember what it felt like to see a Trans Am on the highway and know that the driver was probably having more fun than they should have been. There is a generation that remembers the sound of a Ram Air 400 at the drag strip, the rattle of T-tops on a warm evening, the pride of parking something with a screaming chicken on the hood. Pontiac did not die because people stopped wanting those experiences. It died because the system that controlled the brand spent 2 decades forgetting what made those experiences special in the first place. The uniqueness got traded away for platform consolidation. The character got replaced with plastic cladding and corporate efficiency. By the time anyone tried to course correct with cars like the G8, the brand had already been hollowed out. There was nothing left to save except the name, and the name alone was not worth the investment. So here is the question I want to leave you with. In your opinion, what was the last real Pontiac? Was it the G8 GXP, that final burst of brilliance before the lights went out? Was it the last Firebird Trans Am in 2002? Or do you have to go all the way back to the smoky 70s to find a car that truly embodied what Pontiac was supposed to be? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what people who love these cars think. And if you found this story as interesting as I did, hit like and subscribe. We cover deep dive automotive history like this every week, and there are plenty more brands, decisions, and might have beens to explore. Until next time.